Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode from Across the Table. Few issues are more important to Gibraltar right now than the treaty with the European Union. After years of complex negotiations following Brexit and with implementation, hopefully, near, this marks a pivotal moment for Gibraltar. Today I'll be having an in-depth conversation with the Chief Minister, exploring the treaty, highlighting aspects of it, and help provide an understanding of how we will shape our future. Chief Minister, firstly, thank you very much for joining. I know you must be up to your head now over media duties. So once again, thank you. But before I begin, I would like to just to keep one point in mind for everyone listening, watching, and when they hear the news, that with the treaty, there is one key point that needs to be understood while reading it, and to keep, what's the word for it? Through the lens, shall we say, when you're reading the article, when you hear about the article, is Article 2. I think reading the treaty through Article 2 will calm a lot of misunderstanding about the treaty. I've got the treaty here, I won't read it out. Article 2, I won't read it out. But it's basically that nothing in the agreement affects the sovereignty or the jurisdiction over Gibraltar. So I think it would be a good idea, Chief, just for a small brief of the importance of the treaty, and then what's one misunderstanding you hear most often that's just wrong about the treaty.
Well, okay. So the importance of the treaty, I think, is understood by people, because the treaty has to be really put in the context of the alternative to the treaty, which is that there would be, in effect, a hard but not closed border between Gibraltar and the European Union for reasons of immigration reality. We would be operating a reciprocal system to the system that the European Union, not Spain, the European Union would be operating at the frontier. And so we would be taking biometrics of those who were coming in who were not residents of Gibraltar. And that would have created a frontier which would have been, at peak times and even not at peak times, difficult to traverse. Now, you see these things at frontiers. You see these things, for example, when you are entering the United States. But you go to a major airport in the United States, like Miami Airport, you see people who leave the aircraft and are hurrying up because there's 400 people behind you. And if you're 400th in that queue, you're going to wait quite a while to do the fingerprints and the iris scan and show the passport. If you've got kids, it's even more complex. And yours is not the only aircraft arriving. So there might be 3 or 4 aircraft with 400, 500 people ahead of you in the queue. So imagine that type of system, which in an airport can work relatively efficiently, operating at the Gibraltar-Spain frontier in both directions, where the volume at peak times is much greater. And peak times is not just 5 o'clock in the afternoon or between 3:30 in the afternoon and 7 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday, or between 6:45 in the morning and 10 o'clock in the morning when the workers are coming in. Peak time on the way in is when the tourists are coming in during the morning on a busy summer's day. Peak time on Saturday is when the Gibraltarians are trying to go to Spain for the weekend or for lunch or for shopping between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Everyone's very patriotic and doesn't care whether we close the frontier. But between 9 and 2 o'clock on a Saturday, people are going to Spain, which is fine, and it doesn't undo patriotism. But we have to put things in their proper context. Yeah. And so the treaty has to be understood to alleviate that in a way that is, of course, and we talk about this a lot, good for business. And business is hugely important to Gibraltar because business pays the tax. That means that our personal taxes can be lower and we can still continue to offer scholarships for our children and have the GHA that we have, etc. But it's also good beyond business for human relations and for human activity. I mean, you don't have to have relatives in Spain to want to go to Spain at the weekend, perhaps every other weekend or once a month. It's perfectly normal human behavior. You don't have to have relatives in Spain to suddenly fall in love with someone who lives in Spain of any nationality, Spanish or otherwise. So this normalizes everything and stops us having to go through that very difficult frontier with all of the benefits that has commercially and at a human level. And when you see all that through, as you put it, the filter, I would put it the gateway of Article 2, which means that all sovereignty aspects are neutralized for legal purposes, then I think that that is really a treaty that is very, very, very good for Gibraltar, because although it's not perfect, it delivers against all of the things that concerned us and doesn't attack any of the things that we wanted to ensure remain sacrosanct.
The one misunderstanding then that you hear most often?
Well, I mean, the one misunderstanding that annoys me the most, if you like, probably that's the best one, and it doesn't seem to annoy the GSD, and they seem to be very relaxed about and actually defending this idea that traders can legitimately say that things are going to be 15% more expensive in the future. Well, that is not legitimately the case. That is not legitimately the case. As I've explained before, some traders have been saying that, not all traders, the vast majority of traders, as usual, the vast majority of people are doing the right thing in the right way. They're saying, look, things may be slightly more expensive because if I have to pay 15% transaction tax, which is akin to a 15% import duty, the import duty on the things I sell is going to go up by a small amount, because in some instances they're already paying 12, or by a large amount, because in some instances they may be paying 3 now, for example, and therefore that price difference is going to have to be passed on to you. That is not the same as saying, if you don't buy it now, it'll be 15% more expensive after the date of implementation, because the 15% is charged on the importation value of the thing. So to give you the example I've given in other instances, if a trader, imports something for £50 and sells it for 100, I'm not criticizing the margin. I'm just using that as an easy example, right? Yeah. Then 15% on the £50 is £7.50. So it would be false and it would be fraudulent for the trader to pretend that the thing that used to be sold for 100, because it was imported for 50, without any import duty, would now rightly be sold for 115, when in fact, to keep the profit margin at 50, you would sell it for £107.50. Yeah. If the thing already paid 6%, then the increase is half that. It's £3.25. Yeah, it's not a whole £7.50. Yeah. So you've got to work all that in to say, look, it is fair to say to people that there may be transaction tax on some things, and if the things that you're going to buy are the ones that have the transaction tax, which is not going to be at zero, then that thing is either going to be 5% more expensive or 15% more expensive if the current import duty on those things is zero. But then again, the import duty is not zero on most things. It's either 3% or 6% or 12%. So the thing will be more expensive by the increase in the duty to the transaction tax. In some instances, it may be 3%, it's going to go up to 5%. 2% difference. I mean, that's the reality of what we're dealing with. And it does not affect the fundamentals. It doesn't affect food, for example, and all the things that are going to be zero rated. So that is something that I'm finding very frustrating, because I think it's very unfair for the few traders who have been saying that to be saying it. It not only is it fraudulent, it's also scaring people in the context of the cost of the treaty. And I'm particularly disappointed with the GSD, because to score a cheap political point, they've come out saying that we've been bellicose in the way that we've approached traders, when we haven't. We've been bellicose in the way that we've approached fraudulent traders who are trying to perpetrate a fraud on the consumer. Now, look, I'm elected to represent all of the people of Gibraltar, including its traders. But I'll take a position which is contrary to those traders who are acting contrary to the interests of the people of Gibraltar, because I represent the people of Gibraltar, consumers in Gibraltar, working people in Gibraltar. And it's wrong to try to trick them with this game on the percentages. The vast majority of traders are honest, and they're saying the real honest thing. A small number are being dishonest, in my view, and I'm very surprised to see the GSD coming out in support of them. And in fact, I think I've seen that the Federation and the Chamber may also have come out, and I think that's particularly unfair, because the Federation and the Chamber are made up of predominantly honest traders who do not need to be defended against this. It's the dishonest traders, the vast minority of dishonest traders, who need to be told that this is improper, and the government's going to continue standing up and saying that this is wrong, whether the GSD, the Chamber and the Federation like it or not, because we represent the little guy, the guy who's going to buy and does not deserve to be hoodwinked into thinking that things are more expensive when they are not as more expensive as some are pretending.
that answers my question on transactional tax, which I had later on. But I think it was the way those were worded when the statements that those businesses put out, which did create a lot of confusion and did create a lot of traction online.
Yeah, and I think that maybe that some businesses made a mistake in the way that they worded those things, and those that did changed it. But there are some who are insisting, and it's insisting in the face of mathematical logic that is really
and what's been stated before. Yeah,
it's very disturbing, because if somebody's saying no, it's just mathematically right. As I read someone say the other day, that this is going to be 15% more expensive. Well, it's not going to be 15% more expensive to the consumer when they buy it, because the difference doesn't have to be that. I accept that the trader is going to pass on the tax. I accept that. And some traders will absorb an element of the tax and pass an element on. But even those who are going to pass on the whole amount of the tax, if they're going to increase it by 15%, even on a product that was at zero, what they're telling you is that they before were paying zero import duty and making zero profit on it. Yeah. Because you can't charge 15% on the profit. You charge 15% on the amount of the declared value on importation. No? So what I find extraordinarily frustrating is that people should be trying to trade on people's fears about the treaty in this way and expect that the government is not going to challenge them with the truth.
Yeah. But it is within the treaty as a whole, the concordat. Can you just explain what the concordat is and why it couldn't be in the treaty?
So the concordat is what applies between Gibraltar and the UK. So it's like what you might call our internal manual of how we are going to operate the treaty. Yeah, because remember that this treaty makes references to the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and then it makes many, many, many more references to the United Kingdom in respect of Gibraltar. Now, it's the UK that has to do the treaty, because constitutionally Gibraltar is not empowered to enter into international obligations, because in international law we are not an entity. But the obligations acquired by the United Kingdom are for the territorial limits of Gibraltar. And that's something that the EU, the UK, Spain, and Gibraltar were very keen should be clear. Nothing that is in the treaty applies to what happens in the UK. Nobody's going to have the right from Schengen to go to the UK without showing their passport because of this treaty. So because it's going to apply in Gibraltar, and because the Gibraltar Constitution makes all of these things, except the military aspects of the treaty, the responsibility of Gibraltar ministers, the Gibraltar government, they're not the responsibility of the UK, even though the obligations are acquired in the international legal sphere, which is where the UK has the external relations power under the Constitution. Then we have to be the ones running these things on the ground, and on the ground interaction with the treaty and the other treaty parties, including the Schengen authorities, that is to say, the Kingdom of Spain. So there'll be a lot of what goes on that we are responsible for going forward, even in the context of renegotiation, committees, attendance at committees, etc., etc. The concordat has to regulate that between us and the UK. How we agree that is going to be managed. And of course, the thing that everyone's put the accent on, which is the termination clause, which is, let's hope, the one that is least relevant, but it's fair enough to be looking at it. And therefore, the government has been negotiating the concordat with the UK at the same time as we've been looking at the treaty. So as we've gone through the treaty, the UK and the Gibraltar side have said, okay, that thing that we've now agreed with the European Union, that's a thing that we have to agree in the concordat between us, will be regulated in this way. You then have to write that down. All the things that we've agreed have to be written down. The writing down of that implies a lot of overseas territories law between Gibraltar and the UK, how it's written down, what the UK Parliament is always going to have the right to do, what the Gibraltar Parliament is constitutionally always going to be the one empowered to do whilst there is a constitution, etc. All of that has to be written down, and then the written down versions will lead to elements of negotiation between Gibraltar and the UK, as well as to one or the other might want to see things written down. So that is a process that's almost finalized. It hasn't been assisted by the fact that there's a war in the Middle East, because of course, UK ministers are very engaged on those issues. Gibraltar ministers are also engaged on the cost of living aspects of those issues. And therefore, it's complex, but I'm sure that we will be able to finalize the draft between us and the UK in a form that is agreeable. Then that document is signed. That is not a legal document. That's really a political document. That's why it's not called an agreement. It's called a concordat. It's really just a political agreement as to how things will be done in the future. It will have legal interpretative value, but it's not a contract in its classic sense.
It's a gentleman's agreement, really. In the basic terms, just so like we're all aware, it's like a gentleman's agreement.
It's more than that.
Your word.
A gentleman's agreement is based on a handshake. Yeah, this is actually written down, and so once it's written down, it's more than just a handshake. It's just a memorandum between us of how we have agreed this will be done. This is our meeting of minds. This is what we believe. Yeah.
This cannot be in the treaty because the UK cannot have a treaty deal with its own territory, for one, if I'm mistaken.
So it can't be in the treaty because the treaty is between the UK and the EU.
Yeah.
And this does not concern the EU, right? It has to be in the British sphere that these things happen, right? In the same thing as there may be things that happen in the European sphere between Spain and the European Commission, or indeed between other member states and the European Commission in relation to this treaty. Those things are things that happen on each side, and our side is, of course, the British side.
Yeah. And the bonus for that as well is if there's any change that you want to make, you don't have to open up the treaty and sit with everyone again because you want to change something in that agreement.
No, the concordat is just between us, yeah.
We'll move on then swiftly to the... Could you please explain just then the three-tier dispute resolution then, how the system operates?
So the key thing is to always remember that you've got a corporation council, and you would expect that most of the things that you would be dealing with would be in the corporation council. So when something is going right or wrong, or when you want to change something in the way that it's done, not the treaty, but the mechanics of things, you'll be going to the corporation council, you'll be reviewing what's going right, what's not going so right, how could we do things in a more efficient way. Technology might change things in the future. There might be much more frontier technology that we might want to incorporate at the airport, which might make things lighter and easier for passengers. For example, Heathrow is about to bring in a system where you walk into the airport, having checked in online, having given your passport details online. You never show your passport or your identity to anyone because the cameras at Heathrow Airport will detect your face, and you will only be stopped if your face is not in keeping with the information provided already before your check-in, before you arrive at the airport. Something like that would obviously require discussion at the Corporation Council if it's going to apply at Gibraltar Airport. It would make the passenger experience much better, and it would be a change to the way that we have to do things. So as this is adopted at Schengen airports and it can be adopted at Gibraltar, that sort of thing would be dealt with at the Corporation Council. You would also probably take to the Corporation Council an initial disagreement. So look, we are each looking at this in a slightly different way. Can we find, through cooperation, a way of doing it which is agreeable to you and to me?
Yeah.
So that, I would say, is the first level of how you deal with things if there is a disagreement. Then, of course, you have the issue of the dispute resolution mechanism. The dispute resolution mechanism is like the type of arbitration that you would have in order to resolve something that you have not been able to find an agreed way out of. So you would go to what in effect would be like litigation style. Yeah, you would appoint an arbitrator, you would make some pleadings, the other side would make some pleadings, the arbitrator would make a decision, and then you would agree to abide by the decision of the arbitrator if you wanted the treaty to continue. So that's another way that you would resolve a dispute, by going to a bespoke court-style process. But it's arbitration. It's not one of the established international tribunals like the European Court of Justice of the European Union or the International Court. And then the alternative, of course, is if you can't do that, then you have the opportunities to call in the termination clauses and give notice for termination, which will also give you an opportunity of dealing with something that you cannot live with. And just terminating the treaty. Yeah. So let's hope we never get there. Yeah. Let's hope we don't ever get to dispute resolution, and let's hope that we can deal with all matters in the Corporation Council. All treaties have dispute resolution mechanisms, or all treaties that are not adopted by entities that already have dispute resolution mechanisms, and all treaties have termination clauses if they're done in peacetime. I mean, some treaties which are to resolve wars are really just surrenders, and there's no way out other than going back to war. But that's not where we are. No? So those cooperation, dispute resolution, and termination are the types of manners in which you would resolve issues.
Can you go for the determination, like you were saying? Do you have to go for the first two steps to go to the third, or can you just say, hasta aquí llegamos?
No, you can always go straight to termination if you wanted to. You've got to also factor into that a lot of the geopolitics that would be relevant to a decision of that type. There would be economic aspects to termination. There would be political aspects to termination. There would be strategic aspects to termination. There would be military aspects to termination. All of those things would be in play alongside the commercial and human things that have led us to want to do the treaty, which would be undone by a termination, both for those who have supported the treaty and for those who haven't supported the treaty, who might then having wished for no treaty once they felt what a termination would bring.
I asked that because going through the treaty myself, I got to Article 5, and I think it was quite important to discuss this. And I'll read it out for the people so they know what we're on about. So, Article 5, good faith. The parties shall, in full mutual respect and good faith, assist each other in carrying out tasks that flow from this agreement and any supplementing agreement. Point 2, they shall take all appropriate measures, whether general or particular, to ensure the fulfillment of the obligations arising from this agreement and from any supplementing agreement, and shall refrain from any measures which could jeopardize the attainment of the objectives of this agreement or any supplementing agreement. Point being, I wanted to highlight that one because Article 5 would go into that cooperation and arbitration tribunal if they don't do the stuff in good faith. So it's an interesting article to have, and I think it's
you've got to have that article, but it's an article that you'll find in most treaties, because it's an article where you're pledging yourself to work for the success of the objectives of the treaty, and it's common to have that sort of commitment to working in good faith to deliver, and that means understanding what it is that your negotiating opponent, who is now your treaty partner, has wanted to achieve and avoid, and what you've wanted to achieve and avoid, and your now treaty partner also helping you to avoid that. Sometimes these things, apart from the treaty not being perfect, you also have to remember that implementation of the treaty is not going to be perfect because, as I say, sometimes these things require teething process of how things are going to be working. And they, apart from requiring a teething process in the mechanical aspects of implementation of the treaty, they sometimes also require an adaptation of people and an adaptation of minds. So Joseph, Michael and I have been at the table with Daniel D'Amato and the whole of the British team and Gibraltar team. We've been at the table for 5 years. We've understood issues and worked together to resolve them for our European colleagues and our Spanish colleagues in the same way as they've resolved issues for our UK and Gibraltar British point of view. That needs to trickle through into how people see things on the ground and how we treat each other on the ground. And look, there's lots of people in Spain who are Vox and who are Partido Popular and who are going to take a continued fascist approach to Gibraltar. So we're not going to terminate the treaty. We're not going to raise the dispute resolution mechanism in the treaty. And we're not even going to go to the Cooperation Council because some idiot who supports a football team in Madrid says he will da Español during the course of a European Champions League match in Manchester. We're just going to call him a frigging idiot because that's the language of a fascist dictator of the 1960s who is described as a murderous fascist dictator by the current Spanish government. And if people don't move on from that, the problem is in their minds, not in ours. But that is the sort of attitude we will still continue to face in much of Spain. In the same way as Spanish women that still face machismo in certain parts of Spain, although it's completely illegal, improper, and something for the history books. So we've got to change hearts and minds in the way that we behave under the treaty, and we've got to put that sort of behavior in its proper context and just completely ignore it because we know what the reality on Gibraltar is. We know what this treaty is going to deliver for us, and we have to be mature enough to act and see beyond that nonsense.
So I was saying for point 2 of that one, just highlighting what you're saying, it's like the spiritual guiding force really of the whole treaty. So how potentially crucial is it that the overall success of the agreement is, and you just highlighted and you said it really well, the hearts and minds. It's
things in the modern world can only happen by consent. So in Gibraltar, we do policing by consent. Yeah, when our armed forces go beyond the United Kingdom, they go there to win hearts and minds, not to try and bomb their way into somebody else's home in a way that is not going to win hearts and minds. So whether you're dealing with one extreme or the other, you're always having to work through things by consent, and that's very important to the way that we've done our politics in the past 15 years. So I like to think that we've won hearts and minds on the equality issues in Gibraltar. We haven't rammed them down people's throats. We've worked carefully and diligently to bring the community with us. And sometimes opposition to things can be very loud, but it doesn't mean that opposition is very strong. So when we had the reproductive rights referendum, the abortion referendum, there was initially talk that the community was going to be divided, that it was going to be very close, and all the rest of it. It was far from close. And if you look at the referendum on leaving the European Union, in Gibraltar, the position was exactly as we all thought, overwhelmingly in favor of staying. So this treaty is based on those hearts and minds in Gibraltar that wanted to remain in the European Union, having the things that we needed from the European Union. And I hope that in the region around us, that is also what is felt. And to be fair to the Spanish government, I think it's evangelizing the value of the treaty. Certainly what we might call the Spanish left, in a way that is designed to at least have those hearts and minds on board and changing views about Gibraltar generally. Now, it's true that we've seen all that before. We saw it with Mondadinos. We saw it with aspects of the Córdoba Agreement, which were not happy with, but the vast majority of Gibraltarians accepted because Sir Peter won an election in 2007, having done the Córdoba arrangements. And so it's a process. This treaty has to survive implementation. We have done it to endure for decades, but whether it endures for decades is not a matter for those of us who have done it. It's a matter for those of us who come behind, and whether they look after it and whether they nurture it on the Spanish side and on the Gibraltar side, even if the political parties change. Always thinking first about the people on the ground, whether on the Spanish side or the Gibraltar side. The Spanish have to think about the people they represent. The Gibraltarian government has to think about the people it represents, and thinking about future generations and what the alternative is to this treaty, imperfect as it is for all sides. If the treaty were perfect for one side or for the other, it would not be a treaty.
No.
It would be a surrender document, and it's not a surrender document. It's a win-win in the sense that all sides are able to say, I achieved what I needed to achieve, but it hasn't been easy, and I've had to make compromises.
I think it is because we had, what I've seen, you might have seen it as well, the Prime Minister of Spain, Mr. Pedro Sánchez, was on a podcast, and he did speak positively about the treaty and the Campo de Gibraltar. How refreshing is that to hear Prime Minister of Spain actually talk?
The first Spanish Prime Minister I've met who hasn't raised Gibraltar in the first... let's not.
But by the way, I think there were like 3 Labour governments in Gibraltar, in Spain, and in Britain. Thanks to, I think, generosity, responsibility, and of course, thinking about people in Gibraltar and in Campo de Gibraltar, we managed to reach a very important agreement. So I think that this was a very important milestone in order to scale up and strengthening our bilateral cooperation.
Look, I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything that Pedro Sánchez has done as Prime Minister of Spain in relation to Spain, although ideologically we're on the same side. And I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything that he said in relation to Gibraltar. But in 2018 already, in June or July, when he was taking over from Mariano Rajoy on the motion of censure, when he was presenting to the Congress of People's Deputies in Madrid what he was going to do if he was elected to be the president of the Spanish government, he said in relation to the Campo de Gibraltar, and Gibraltar, I'm going to do something which is beyond the eternal issue of sovereignty. So he was already talking about Gibraltar and the Campo de Gibraltar as two separate entities, both of whom were in the context of what he might do in his mind. Of course, I've known Pedro for many years before he became president of the Spanish government, and I'm very pleased to see that. And I think it is refreshing to see that, not just at the level of the Spanish foreign minister, but also at the level of the president of the Spanish government. But it's in the nature of what he's done, being very progressive in Spain on so many key issues, that he would be progressive on this too. And, on that he enjoys the full support of Sumar and Podemos and Esquerra Republicana and Partido Nacionalista Vasco, who are probably even Junts, who are what are known as los socios de la investidura, the partners in his investiture, in his third general election, I think, on his third investiture, his second general election, although there may have been three, because I think one had to be repeated. The history of the past 8 years is a little hazy.
It's a blur now.
It's a bit of a blur. So look, it's very good. It's very positive, and it's the way forward. And I do hope that that there is a way of ensuring that endures in the left. And I hope that there is not a desire to undo that approach on the center right. I mean, on the right and the hard right,
we already know where they are.
We know. I mean, I saw a video from some guy that represents Vox in the European Parliament the other day, where the only thing that was missing was that he should raise his left hand in the air in the Hitler salute, and that he should have swastikas hanging out behind him and Spanish flags with black eagles on them. I mean, this is really something not to be surprised about, because all of these people are related to the people who were Franco's ministers and whose grandparents were fighting with the Nazis and the Blue Brigades for Spain. Again, this is history. It's coming back, as it always comes back, and I do hope that the vast majority will be sensible enough that on the issue of Gibraltar, which affects 300,000 people in this region, not just 15,000 cross-frontier workers, they'll be sensible enough to disregard that approach. But modern politics is not predictable, other than to say that it is unpredictable.
Well, if you check the comments and if you do a quick glance through them, a lot of people were against exactly what he was saying. And there's a lot of Spanish comments there, which was a good sign. But we also have to be careful with UK politicians. I've seen you reply to some senior politicians that it's like they have political amnesia. They forget where all of this started. Yeah. How annoying is that? To answer them.
I mean, it's no longer even annoying, because it's so predictable that they're going to go for the easy headline, the clickbait. I mean, and they are really distilling things into a nonsensical degree. This treaty is hugely complex. It doesn't compromise British sovereignty. You can take one thing and to try and do a headline that people will click on, you can dress it in a particular way, but then if you read the whole thing, actually it says the opposite. And if a politician who is finding it difficult to get traction can identify that headline in a major right-wing leaning newspaper and use it to put an even more misleading tweet on it, then all you have to do is just chop it down, kill it dead, and that's the approach that we have to take, even though that particular politician, when she was Home Secretary, might have been very happy with the arrangements that are the same ones that she agreed are the ones that are in the treaty.
It's like I said, because it's just for the political game that they play, just to have it against Labour. They'll have that headline, and you're like, but you were at the beginning, you were at the start.
It doesn't even piss me off anymore, because I think they're just playing a game which isn't politics as we know it.
No.
This is just changing the rules to the extent that telling the truth doesn't matter. It's just a question of trying to create an anathema in the people that you represent to something, so that they say they're going to vote for you because we all together hate that thing over there. And unfortunately, that just doesn't relate to treaties. It also relates to classes of people, and that's when it becomes discrimination, and it's borderline racism, in my view. And it's quite remarkable to see a party in the United Kingdom that is sometimes on the borderline of racism. And I'm, because I'm on my way out of politics, I will have no difficulty calling these things out when I'm no longer a Chief Minister of Gibraltar. And the next Chief Minister of Gibraltar whoever he or she may be, and the next party that is in government, which I hope will be the GSLP Liberals, but if it's another party, they will be able to rely on me to tell those people what frigging fools they are without having to engage the then chief minister. He or she is not going to have to get his or her hands dirty.
And that segues in beautifully for my next question. What are the biggest lessons the Gibraltar government has learned about negotiating with the EU and the UK that might inform future generations of politicians on future treaties and agreements?
Stand your ground. Stand your ground. Understand your opponent and their issues, and be able and ready to help them with the things that are as important to them as the things that are important to you are to you. Yeah. So you have to understand the European Union and the things that the European Union needs to protect. And therefore, having someone like Michael Llamas on our side who understands the European Union legally inside out is fundamental. Having Joseph and me together who saw the European Union as potentially one of the ways that we would resolve the Gibraltar issue going forward politically is hugely important. Joseph and I went together to Brussels sometime in 1995 or something, or 1996, I think 95. And we were there together looking at what Brussels could do in terms of resolving all of these issues. It continued to form a hugely important part of our political lives when we were together in the Liberal Party. And then when I came to the Socialist Party, it continued to be part of what we always saw as the solution. So we've always understood what Europe needs to protect. What are the fundamentals that the Commission needs to protect? What are the founding keystones of the European Union that the European Union will never cede on in any negotiation? And the TCA and the Mercosur agreement and the agreements with India and Japan, all of these things which we've tracked. More recently, the one that was ongoing with Australia, the EU agreements with the microstates, with Monaco, with Liechtenstein, with Andorra. All of these things are hugely informative of the things that the EU will not concede on. The EEA agreements, like the agreements with Norway and Switzerland, you've got to understand those things. And you can't go into the negotiation saying, we, Gibraltar, will not agree to the things that you have imposed on Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein, Andorra, all of the nations of South America, etc. We will be different. No, you've got to understand that those things are fundamental to the EU, and the EU will not cede on those. And they didn't cede when they did the TCA, and they wouldn't cede now. So that is what the EU would consider to be, in my view, a respectful position. Yeah. The same is true of Spain. You have to understand the politics of Spain inside out. So I've been very clear always to people who come and see me about the job and what it entails, how I speak to the people who might be my successors, the people who I try and encourage to take an interest in politics. You've got to read the Gibraltar Chronicle, the Financial Times, the Times, El País. You've got to listen to Cadena Ser. You've got to know what is being said on Radio Televisión Española. You've got to know what the BBC are reporting on, what Sky News are reporting on. You've even got to keep an eye on whether the prejudices are on GB News to understand what is happening in the politics of the Prime Minister and in the politics of the President of Spain. And you need to know what Ms. von der Leyen is thinking about and what she's fundamentally going to have to protect. Then when you turn up at the table, when your Spanish counterpart says something, when your European counterpart says something, or when your British partner says something, you're not surprised. You saw it all coming. And therefore you have a position that you can advance, which is going to find traction, which is not going to affect any of their sensibilities, and is going to be in keeping with your fundamental view. That is hugely important. And note that I've also talked about my British counterpart, because my British partner here has a politics at home. If he's a conservative lord like David Cameron, he's got the politics of the Conservative Party and the politics of reform and how all of that is playing out in his world and what the Labour Party position is. And he has a position which is nuanced in that way. You have to understand that. So the Gibraltar position sails through that. Ditto the Spanish counterpart, because he's got all the politics of Vox, all the politics of Sumar and Junts and Esquerra Republicana playing out with Partido Nacionalista Vasco on their positions. You've got to sail carefully through that. And then you've got the imperatives of the European Commission. If you haven't done your homework in understanding all of that, it doesn't form part of your ability to understand politics and the world in which you operate geostrategically. And you haven't updated that every single morning, and afternoon and evening, you are not doing the job in the way that you have to do it. and you will not be able to predict what they're going to say. And if you haven't predicted what they're going to say and tag teamed that with your colleagues in the team on the Gibraltar side, you're not ready for what's going to happen at the table, and that would be unforgivable. And you would not get the result we have been able to obtain if you hadn't done that work. And so I think it's important to say that that is why the job of chief minister and the job of negotiating, whether you're chief minister, deputy chief minister, or lead negotiator for Gibraltar like Michael Llamas, has not been an easy one. And why the armchair generals who all think that they could have done better, who all think that we just had a role there that was observing and not negotiating, etc., haven't got a frigging clue. And they need to wake up and smell the coffee and realize that this is a job that is very difficult to do right and very easy to do wrong, as they would have done if they had been the ones sitting at the negotiating table. And because I'm not asking anybody to vote for me anymore, I don't care if they think that's arrogant or not, that's the reality.
There's a podcast episode I'm trying to put together, and hopefully I can. It will be sitting down and trying just at the basic level what it is like sat at a table, actually doing those negotiations, how it all work, how it actually plays out, what he says, how do you write it down? So I'll probably try and get that one done, because I think that would be really enlightening for a lot of people to see how hard. It's not just sit down or I don't agree. I agree.
No, yeah, I don't agree. It's difficult, but in particular, remember that I've sat at the table with negotiating giants, right? So I've got David Lammy or David Cameron there, yeah, at that top table. They represent 60 to 80 million people, yeah? One of the 5 countries with nuclear bombs at the Security Council, yeah? The leading NATO member other than the United States, yeah? With a worldwide reach. Mm-hmm. Spain, okay, we know all the things we think about Spain. 4th, 5th largest economy in the European Union. At the G20, hugely influential in Africa, in Latin America. Now Pedro Sanchez really leading Europe morally. He's Europe's conscience, and José Manuel Alvarez, who is a first-class operator. You just have to see how much he is criticized by the right wing in Spain to realize what a first-class operator you're dealing with there. David Lammy and David Cameron and José Manuel Alvarez, all of them first-class brains. These are not people who are going to forget things and you're going to be able to score an easy one. That only happens in the Gibraltar Parliament. Then you've got someone like Markus Sefcovic, who represents 480 million people. Yeah, he's the vice president of the European Union. He's got issues coming out of his ears, and he's giving time to this because he's being asked to give time to this by Spain, and it matters to the European Union in an ideological sense, in the opening sense of this frontier, getting rid of this unnecessary obstacle to free movement, etc. Yeah. And that is Marcus is a charming, careful, hugely intelligent man who is supported by the most intelligent people that you can come across. I mean, these are really first-class brains on steroids that understand the legal structure of the European Union, and the European Union is a legal structure. It's nothing else. It's a legal structure, right? And that legal structure is hugely complex, yeah? And thank God I got Michael Llamas on my side who understands it just as well, yeah? And that is the chessboard. 4 sides to it, yeah? Because sometimes the equities the UK has are slightly different because of the politics, yeah? And they're protecting the territorial United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland from any of these freedoms that we're trying to secure here, yeah? You've got to be able to understand all of the imperatives that they all have in order to get the people who are represented by you safely across all of the snakes and ladders in that room. 60 million people? Sorry, 80 million people? 40 to 60 million people? 480 million people. 38,000 Gibraltarians, you know? Yeah, and with Joseph and with Michael, we have achieved that. You know, if you asked me, and I'm not here to ask the questions, but if you ask me what is the greatest compliment anybody has ever paid you in politics in 30 years, and I've been in this game, Sir Peter Caruana saying that no different team could have delivered a better deal than the one that we have delivered is undoubtedly undoubtedly, because of who it comes from and because of what it means, the best compliment that's ever been paid to Joseph, to Michael, and to me.
And it's also the teams that are behind those individuals as well. So I don't know how many are in the room. I know it's just maybe you four, and then you see it behind. You got the European Union, and they might have, I don't know, what is it, 8 to 10 people behind, all the scribes,
there's a lot
all
of
the
people.
legal
I mean,
experts.
to be fair, like everything, it's all a bit of
don't
a
want to go
pyramid.
into my
So David Cameron and David Lammy will have their immediate team, but they've got all of Whitehall behind them. And it's also true to say that as a result, we had all of Whitehall behind us because we had the full support of the Home Office and of the Foreign Office. And this was very much a team. We just, in terms of between us and the UK, we just had to be careful that we didn't cause them a problem with their politics. No. Otherwise, they was fully supportive of the positions that we were taking, and we had the full support of the UK Whitehall teams, and that's huge. So I can't pretend it's just me, Joseph, and Michael. And then, of course, we have the full support of the Gibraltar Civil Service because we were going, portfolio by portfolio, and all of the issues that you are now seeing are set out in the agreement, which they relate to housing, they relate to environment, they relate to education, they relate to all of those issues. And so we had all of the Gibraltar teams behind us. And the European Union is a behemoth, and people do not become, vice president of the European Union. They don't become the key advisors running cabinets in the European Union if they are not top world-class brains, So when I read some of the stuff that I read on Facebook here, I almost feel like sending the people who think that this is a treacherous treaty to spend 10 minutes at the table when they come back completely chewed out, having surrendered British sovereignty without even having noticed that they had done so in the first 45 seconds of their engagement. That's the reality that we're dealing with. That is the reality that we're dealing with. And it's important that if you don't want to have the sort of politics that we're seeing anywhere else in the world, to call it out. Mm-hmm. Call it out and tell it as it is. Look, Gibraltar has spent a fortune educating people to send those educated people to do the job of educated people, not to then allow the fruit of all that, which is investment since the late 1980s in a highly educated population, to be judged by the least qualified person in the room. And if people don't like what I'm saying, that is just a reality, and we have to get used to. We have to get used again to understanding that there are people who are experts in things and who are the best people to represent us in that thing, even though we might not necessarily be delighted with the result. Because when you go to the doctor, you want him to tell you you're fine. You don't want him to tell you that you've got this or that. When he tells you that you've got this or that, it's because he's done a degree in medicine and he knows you've got this or that, and to save your life, he's got to tell you that you have it and give you the medicine, which might not taste nice. Yeah? But look, otherwise, what's the point of going to the doctor?
Yeah. But it's also to highlight the point that the EU is constantly doing treaties. So these guys, it's not like it's, brush off the cobbles, how did this one work? That team is all the time doing treaties. So for them, it's second nature. So when you come into a room and you're like you said, you're sitting with these people is second nature, everything. And you must get up to that level.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the context of Gibraltar, in the context of Gibraltar, the 1713 treaty, then the UK does a little treaties to which Gibraltar is included, including 1972, the inclusion of Gibraltar with the UK in the Treaty of Rome in 1973 on the 1st of January. And then after that, it's really just extension of treaties to Gibraltar, the trajectory in the European Union. And after 1713, the first important treaty work is the withdrawal agreement, which is a treaty of a type, the tax treaty, which was highly criticized at the time and was going to destroy Gibraltar's economy. And Gibraltar's economy is going like the clappers, even though we haven't had Brexit certainty until now. And now this agreement, which is the treaty between Gibraltar and the European Union through the United Kingdom and the EU. That's huge that we've been able to achieve that. The UK has vast experience in doing treaties, vast experience. And, we've negotiated the thing, and then treaty teams have been supporting us from the UK side and from the EU side as to what this looks like in the context of a treaty, qua treaty. And that has been a remarkable privilege to be able to see that in action and to work with the treaty teams in King Charles Street, which is the headquarters of the Foreign Office in London, has been a huge privilege.
I open, I can imagine. I need to take us back because I would be amiss that I didn't say this, but it hasn't been said, and I think I should highlight this point as well. Another positive of the treaty was the ambulance service, once again crossing and be able to transfer patients and medical supplies to hospitals. How significant of a development is that to get
It's hugely significant in financial terms because we no longer have to pay for the private Spanish ambulances. It's hugely significant also in human terms, so that you can have that movement again, which we used to have. We go back to what it was like in membership of the European Union. In transport terms, it's only the beginning, because once the treaty is done, we then go into the interbus service and into the ECMT, which is the European-wide transport aspect, which is not covered by the European Union, but the European Union and Spain will support our applications through the United Kingdom to form part of interbus and ECMT. It doesn't mean that route buses or taxis will be able to cross the frontier. That will not happen. I think the solution that we have there is good for the taxi service in Gibraltar and the taxi service in Spain, but this frees up transport in the way that we would want. And if you tell me, what is the key thing that you see here? It's that things are going to be easier out of the European Union with this treaty instead of us forming part of the European Union than they were when we were in the European Union and had the benefit of the treaties, but we had the opt-outs and we still didn't have Schengen, etc. And I hope that that trickles through in the context of implementation and the nurturing of the application of the treaty going forward, both by the Spanish and European side and the British and Gibraltar side.
How often will the treaty get reviewed then?
So there's a provision for a review after 4 years, a formal review after 4 years, and an assessment of how things have been going for Schengen, which is normal. There's always a Schengen assessment, which is done between Schengen member states. They check each other to ensure that the borders are safe. I mean, this is, for example, Germany will be assessing another Schengen member state all the time. And Germany itself will be being assessed by other member states all the time. And in that way, you give sort of cross cover to each other to ensure compliance with the Schengen agreement. So there'll be a Schengen assessment, there'll be a review after 4 years. Then the review can come at any time. I mean, the Corporation Council can agree that we'll review every 2 years whether we should be looking at different mechanisms and procedures to make them more agile, to make the whole treaty work better. Again, as I've said to you before, I think that technology is going to be the key driver of review here. As technology comes in, it'll make the ability to move goods and to track goods easier and to tax goods easier in a more electronic way. Our customs officers will have the benefit of barcodes being able to do work of tracking for them, and they'll be able to track things electronically. Our immigration officers will be able to have better biometric data just from a passport. Indeed, they may be able to see all of that biometric data just from having the advanced passenger information provided by ships or by aircraft or by small vessels coming into Gibraltar. All of that, I think, is the sort of thing that we need to be working with the EU and the UK on, so that we are making things as agile as possible between Spain and Gibraltar on the ground.
Coming towards the end, Chief, I did have a few more questions, but because we're delayed in this, you've touched upon it yesterday and the day before, so you've answered those questions. I'm not going to beat it to death. What's the journey been like personally, working on this?
Well, it's been exhausting. I don't think it's over yet because you've got still to get to signature, you've got to get to provision and application, you then need to get to ratification. I'm very protective of this because I've given so much of my life to it, Joseph's life to it, Michael's life to it, the rest of our teams, that until it is done and properly done, I won't feel that I can relax, and we've seen many delays. If you saw something happen in June, it's because it was going to happen in April, then it was going to happen in May, then finally it happened in June. If we're talking about the 10th of April, now it's because we were talking about doing something in February, March, then it slipped to April. I'm not confident that necessarily April is going to be the date. It may slip further and further because there's a war in the Middle East. It's taking people's time. That is delaying things. You need to tick certain legal boxes on the EU side. You need to tick certain boxes on the UK side. All of that needs to come together. And until it's not done, it's not done. So then provisional application, I see myself, losing the date and fighting for the date and it coming later. And it takes a huge toll because, when we started on this, we thought this was going to take 6 months. That was October 2021. The run up to the New Year's Eve agreement had been very tough indeed. We'd negotiated the withdrawal agreement, which was very, very tough with all of those ups and downs. You'll still remember Speaker Bercow, order, anon, and division.
Yeah.
Mrs. May losing votes in the House of Commons, an election in the United Kingdom, her losing her majority, and then Boris Johnson, and then Liz Truss, and all of this is something that we have had to navigate, holding the reins very, very tight here. My personal life has changed hugely in this period. I don't know how much of my professional political life may have been to blame for that change. I've had to deal with that. My two principal colleagues in that have dealt with personal loss also in that period. So you look at who we were on the 22nd of June, 2016, and you look at who we are today, and you look at everything that's gone on and how we have become who we are today, that personal toll has been huge. And it's not over yet. And we have to get this over the line. And until the first person is able to legally walk from Gibraltar into Spain, I don't think we can breathe the first sigh of relief. And until ratification happens, and those two will be different, because we'll have signature, then provisional application, and then ratification, which could go on until the next calendar year. I hope it might be this calendar year, but it could go into the next calendar year because of procedures and parliamentary timetables and all the rest of it. Until then, we won't be able to say, my God, we've done it. And then it could still be undone at any time. But I certainly do hope that there is a maturity in the approach to this, that there might not be in the politics of Europe, the United Kingdom, Spain, or Gibraltar in other areas. And in the same way as we've brought maturity to this negotiating process, and we have worked and talked through our differences with our Spanish and European colleagues, and carefully not cause difficulties in their politics for our British colleagues, that the process of implementation and then application is going to be equally nurtured by all sides, as it will no doubt be from Gibraltar under a GSLP Liberal government, and I do hope under even an alternative government should that disaster ever befall us. We've got to make this work. We've got to make this work. This is Gibraltar's opportunity to show its maturity and to show that the objective and goal that we wanted to achieve is achieved and delivered by us in the good faith that is provided for in Article 5, with the safety and security of the filter in Article 2, and with the strength and maturity of the people of Gibraltar to deliver against an international legal obligation in respect of which we would never let the United Kingdom down. I've done many things in the last 15 years, most of which I'm proud of, some of which perhaps I might not have got exactly right. This is one where I think if I had to, I would say to my children, this is the one thing I did of which you can be proud.
That's what I was going to say. That was going to be my final question to finish it off. Will this be the most important part of your legacy for you personally? I know COVID, because we've said this before, COVID for you was the big one. But would this one...
Well, look, when we publish the bill for the act that will enable us to implement this treaty, I said that this was the most seminal piece of legislation I would have moved in my time in Parliament, except for the bills that relate to equality. So if there was one thing that I would say Gibraltar was really lacking on in 2011, we can have political disagreements about many things, yeah? But the one thing that was really lacking, genuinely a big problem, was our approach to equality, sexual equality in particular. And so I would say that the big step forward that we have taken was in relation to equality, and that needed to be done and was long overdue. And I don't want to forget that. I don't want to forget what work we did there and how happy and proud we were of that. I mean, we've changed the face of Gibraltar demographically by having done that work. And this is equal to that, if you'll excuse the pun, if not more, right? I think in terms of the things you do that echo in eternity, it's the equality work and this work. The rest of it, change the schools and the fabric of the schools and the investment in education. All of that will also echo in people's lives, and we've refurbished the estates that we're in a real state that will affect the environment in which you live on and can echo through. But these are the things that matter the most in the context of the transgenerational effect that they will have. And I'm very proud of what we've done, and I do hope it's a transgenerational effect, and that once we've gone, it's not undone, likely not in Gibraltar, but from a sort of bloody-minded approach by a very right-wing Spanish government in the future that just decides it wants to undo this, etc. That would be a real pity. It would be a real pity. But if you read Kipling, you have to be ready for somebody to take your life's work, crush it, and be ready to start again.
On that note, Chief Minister, thank you very much. Thank you for everything that you've done for the treaty and getting us to this point. And I hope in future generation will look back and think, bloody hell, trabajazo que ha hecho este hombre.
Well, but fingers crossed. No,
And the team as well, yeah.
Mike, the UK team and its support and the Whitehall team, this was me. Trabajazo de todo el mundo. We all had a different role. We all had to say things at a particular time to make the whole thing work and bring it together. I'm lucky enough to be the lead singer who gets to sing the anthem on the stage on the last day as the last song for the concert, in the political sense, in the presentation of the treaty, but it doesn't make me more important than any of the others who've been in the guts of this team and working it through. Something which, by the way, I will want to recognise, and I hope the Gibraltar Parliament will join me in recognising in the context of the Gibraltar team in particular, but also the British team.
Yeah, I'll be having the Deputy Chief Minister hopefully in the next episode. We'll run it through with him. But I just wanted to say once again, Chief Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And
take care.